I'm using 60% median annual growth for Bitcoin price appreciation. And I don't know if you can read the chart, but in 10 years' time, we should be at $7 million per coin. So this is a conservative projection, and I think it's probably going to be higher than this. But if this is what comes to pass, then I think you should have some Bitcoin.
Mow concludes by discussing Bitcoin's potential to replace fiat currencies as the world's unit of account. He explains that money evolves through three stages: store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account. While the US dollar currently dominates as the unit of account, Mow believes that Bitcoin will eventually take its place. In the future, prices may be quoted in satoshis, the smallest unit of Bitcoin, rendering fiat currencies obsolete. He predicts that once the shift to Bitcoin occurs, fiat currencies will no longer be necessary, and people will transact exclusively in Bitcoin. At that point, Mow argues, regulations will become irrelevant, as market forces will dictate Bitcoin's dominance. He points out that while El Salvador's legal tender law mandates Bitcoin acceptance, enforcement is limited. Similarly, Argentina's deregulated stance may offer a more practical path toward Bitcoin adoption without regulatory complexities.
Please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. You can also check out our other videos on cryptocurrencies and the overall digital asset space and drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks and enjoy the video.
Bitcoin is the best form of money that we have, and it's outperforming the blue line, which is S&P 500, and the yellow line at the bottom, which is gold. So it's definitely important for every country to have Bitcoin because there is a large potential for Bitcoin to grow. It's effectively an asymmetric bet. So this is my projection. I'm using 60% median annual growth for Bitcoin price appreciation. And I don't know if you can read the chart, but in 10 years' time, we should be at $7 million per coin. So this is a conservative projection, and I think it's probably going to be higher than this. But if this is what comes to pass, then I think you should have some Bitcoin. So this is just comparing two models. The orange line is my model, 60% median growth. The blue line is Saylor's Bitcoin 24 model, but I think he's underestimating the growth potential. So there is also a inflow to market cap relationship between money that's coming into Bitcoin and the price appreciation. So in 2021, the Bank of America extrapolated that $93 million of inflows would be required to increase the market, the Bitcoin price by 1%. And if you work backwards, which some people did, it comes out to 118 times multiplier. So $1 increases market cap by $118. And it goes to show that the potential to increase is much lower for Bitcoin than it is for gold or treasuries. But I think that is a bit high. I think it might be more conservative to estimate with a 20x multiplier. But there is a multiplier, and that's the main point. Basically, if if you wanted to buy 245,000 Bitcoin, the market cap you'll add 15 billion, but you'll increase market cap by 300 billion. So the point of this is that to buy back the Bitcoin that was sold is going to be more and more difficult, especially with competition to other countries that are mining or buying Bitcoin. Bitcoin is also going mainstream, which is another reason to start considering building a Bitcoin treasury. You have MicroStrategy with 250,000, and then you have Marathon and Tesla blocking Semler Scientific, which was a new entrant, I think this year, that started mirroring the MicroStrategy playbook. And then you have Metaplanet as well in Japan, which just spun up recently as well. But in terms of the largest Bitcoin reserves, I think right now China is in lead with 190,000, then followed by the US. And then Germany or Saxony had close to 50,000, but that's gone now. And maybe you can get it back. I hope so. But if you look at overall the landscape of Bitcoin reserves, the US actually is a Bitcoin superpower, even though they don't have that many owned by the government. you have MicroStrategy with a very large portion, but the US ETFs now hold over 960,000 Bitcoin. So the race to accumulate Bitcoin is ramping up very rapidly. Germany also has been a country that has a large amount of gold reserves in the past, historically. So it's one of the top. I think after the US, it's number 2. And the US has 8,000 tons and Germany has 3,300 tons roughly. And we see recently that central banks are rapidly trying to accumulate gold. And that is interesting, but not very practical, because this is a chart showing gold's performance against Bitcoin. It's not very good. But if you look at Germany's holdings of gold at 3,300 tons, then right now, technically you should have, or you should aim to have 281,000 Bitcoin in your strategic reserves. And there's still time, but the time window is closing very rapidly to be able to accumulate this much. So there has also been a marked change in discourse around Bitcoin. It's no longer something that's used by people in dark markets or buying drugs. It is now a form of legal tender in El Salvador. So El Salvador famously has made Bitcoin legal tender, and they've launched a number of other strategies as well. Last year, I think Robert Kennedy Jr., who was a presidential candidate in the US, he also started talking about it. And this year he said he wanted to put together a reserve of 4 million Bitcoin. And we've seen Milei come up in Argentina, and he has not made Bitcoin legal tender or announced a Bitcoin strategic reserve yet, but he has deregulated money, and they've tacitly encouraged people to conduct trade in Bitcoin. And this year, Trump has gone to the Bitcoin conference, and he made a speech saying he wants Bitcoin to be made in the US. And practically speaking, Senator Cynthia Lummis has put together a bill that would allow the US to actually create their strategic Bitcoin reserve, which is aiming to accumulate 1 million Bitcoin, or roughly 5% of the supply. So Bitcoin adoption is real. It is happening as we speak around the world, and the race is heating up, and it will only continue to heat up more. So what can countries do in terms of strategies? There's 3 primary strategies. One is simply buy Bitcoin, put it into the treasury. The second is to issue a Bitcoin bond or use sovereign debt to buy Bitcoin. So effectively, MicroStrategy playbook for nation states. And the third thing is to pass Bitcoin-friendly laws that can make Bitcoin usable either as legal tender or eliminating capital gains or approving of Bitcoin to be used in commerce. So El Salvador has famously done most of the 3 things, or almost 3 things. So they made Bitcoin legal tender. They've passed a digital securities laws, which allows them to facilitate other securities offerings in the country, but more so paving the way for Bitcoin bonds, which I believe should come out this year, fingers crossed. So why is Bitcoin important? Bitcoin is important because it is consuming all of the fiat currencies. And this is inevitable, simply because Bitcoin is the hardest form of money, and it is more durable, and it is more portable, and it has better verifiability than any other form of money on the planet. Countries that adopt a Bitcoin strategy today are going to have a massive advantage in the future. And again, the time window is closing on that. And finally, in closing, you do not sell your Bitcoin.
Mow concludes by discussing Bitcoin's potential to replace fiat currencies as the world's unit of account. He explains that money evolves through 3 stages: store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account. While the US dollar currently dominates as the unit of account, Mow believes that Bitcoin will eventually take its place. In the future, prices may be quoted in satoshis, the smallest unit of Bitcoin, rendering fiat currencies obsolete. He predicts that once the shift to Bitcoin occurs, fiat currencies will no longer be necessary, and people will transact exclusively in Bitcoin. At that point, Mow argues, regulations will become irrelevant, as market forces will dictate Bitcoin's dominance. He points out that while El Salvador's legal tender law mandates Bitcoin acceptance, enforcement is limited. Similarly, Argentina's deregulated stance may offer a more practical path toward Bitcoin adoption without regulatory complexities.
Well, my model is actually very simple. It's just 60% median growth every year. And if you go back 5 to 10 years, roughly you see the same trajectory. But one thing that most models don't account for is that there will be a point at which people just stop using fiat currencies. So we can project out 10 years, 20 years, but the reality is we're probably not going to go to 20 million a coin. And eventually, at some point, we'll just use Bitcoin as the unit of account. So with money, you have three parts of paths to evolution: store of value, unit of account, medium of exchange. So unit of account right now is still the dollar. Even countries that don't use the dollar, their currencies are pseudo-pegged to the dollar or directly pegged to the dollar. But eventually we'll just price things in Satoshis, which is the smallest unit of Bitcoin. Everyone is going to use Bitcoin. It's either you accept it or you wait until you have no choice, because the person you want to buy bread from doesn't want a euro anymore. So at that point, do the regulations really matter? It's just near term. I think you can have good regulations or bad regulations, but the legal tender law I don't think is really legal tender even in El Salvador, because merchants are not forced to accept it. Larger companies are accepting it because they want to make sure they follow the letter of the law. But by and large, most people don't accept Bitcoin yet in El Salvador even, and they're not forced to. So if I go to a business and I say I want to pay in Bitcoin, they say no, I can't call the police. I don't think anyone's going to enforce that. And I think the deregulation path of Argentina is probably more practical, just saying, just use whatever you want. And you can use Bitcoin as money, and there is no barrier there. There's no taxation on it, because you shouldn't be taxed on using money to buy, daily goods. And I think places like Switzerland are okay as well, because there is no capital gains tax. So you can, for example, in Lugano, just spend Bitcoin and buy whatever you want, and it's just treated as money too. And there was no regulation needed for that as well. So I guess it depends really on if there is anything currently prohibiting, because some countries don't allow people to use Bitcoin for payments as well. So either you need to amend that or make a new regulation saying, yes, Bitcoin can be used. So it's very different per country, but I think the countries that we are focused on are more in the developing world, and they are seeking economic growth and investment. So for them, it's not really worrying about all these things that maybe Europeans worry about, but they just want money to come in. And if Bitcoin is an avenue for that, then they will welcome that.
Samson Mow presents a compelling vision of Bitcoin's inevitable rise to global prominence. He warns that the window for accumulating Bitcoin is closing, urging countries and corporations to act quickly to avoid being left behind. Mow's insights highlight not just the economic potential of Bitcoin, but also the geopolitical implications of its adoption. As countries race to build Bitcoin reserves and enact favorable policies, the landscape of global finance is shifting. In the near future, Bitcoin may not only dominate as a store of value, but also emerge as the world's primary unit of account. For those prepared to embrace this change, the rewards could be transformative. For others, waiting may no longer be an option.
Please like and subscribe my channel.